Hey everyone, this is Brown at I have Brown, and tonight we are going to be talking about Essential Ghostwriter, Volume 3. So, this volume here collects issues 51 through 65 of the original Ghostwriter series, as well as issue number 80 of Marvel 2-in-1, as well as an excerpt from Marvel Superheroes number 11, and issue 214 of the Avengers. So, this was a point in the series where Michael Fleischer, who came on board as a series writer with issue number 36, had sort of hit his stride as a writer, I think, at least in my opinion, because I pointed out back in my review of Essential Ghostwriter Volume 2, once he came aboard, right after Jim Shooter had a brief tenure of duty, as well as Roger McKenzie, when Michael Fleischer became the regular writer, the series really began to take off and find its footing from a narrative standpoint in terms of writing. And I would say that within the issues that were collected in Volume 2 that Michael Fleischer wrote, for the most part, those were some of the best Ghostwriter stories that were put to page. But with this volume, while there are still a couple of good stories in here, some by Michael Fleischer and others by writers from the issues from the other series that were collected in here, I feel like Michael Fleischer had unfortunately gotten to a point where he was kind of getting a creative burnout. I don't know if it was necessarily with his writing career in general, but at least in terms of working on Ghostwriter, the series started to feel sort of I guess you could say rushed or mundane. Been there, done that. Oftentimes, there was a sort of monster of the week type of vibe with the stories, or at the very least, the writing just seemed to be not as enthusiastic, or there were times where the writing just unfortunately started to feel like something that was, I guess you could say, more that would have been more at home with the stories that were collected in Volume 1, which, if you watched my review on that, you would know that, at least in my opinion, the writing that was on hand in Volume 1 really was not that good. So, while the series still looks good from an artistic standpoint, with the stories collected here, for the most part, it just really feels like a lot of filler for the most part, with the occasional exception of a good story here and there. But whereas Volume 2 had good stories on a regular basis within that book, the good stories that pop up here are sort of few and far between. But anyway, though, so within the series, it was at a point in time where Johnny Blaze had come to learn that he and the Ghostwriter entity were in fact two separate individuals. Whereas he had initially thought that with the curse of Satan, later revealed to be Mephisto towards the end of the series, basically Marvel's version of the devil. So it's more or less. Johnny Blaze had initially been under the impression that he simply turned into Ghostwriter, and while he was able to maintain his identity and thoughts, he simply had the appearance and power of a demon. But in fact, what was happening was it was like he was literally turning into a demon, and the demon was gradually taking control. And so as Volume 2 showed, this revelation for both parties really started to play havoc with those around them. Because it seemed like everywhere Johnny Blaze went, there was inevitably, some form of chaos that was in some way caused by the Ghost Rider entity. And sometimes it was, caused by outside forces such as demonic entities or supervillains or common earthly miscreants. But, anytime, these crossed paths with Ghost Rider or Johnny Blaze, they found out the hard way that, messing with someone who, in fact, was tied down to a demon from hell was not a good way to, shall we say, get away clean, so to speak. I mean, so Johnny Blaze basically, he was kind of driven on the run, where he took on a lonely life on the road, trying to settle down here and there, but inevitably things would happen to where the Ghost Rider entity would sort of ruin his life, whether it be from acting in self-defense and going overboard on the offending parties, or just straight up being malevolent. So this is a point where there did seem to initially be some form of understanding reached between the two back in Volume 2, wherein like they were never going to be friends or anything like that, but they sort of seem to have come to a compromise of sorts, wherein the Ghost Rider would be given free rein to ride along at night and take down the occasional evil soul with his hellfire, which depending on who you talk to, being blasted with hellfire was essentially worse than being killed, because rather than just killing you, it basically fried in part of your soul, or took a part of your soul, to where it left you, less of a person than you were beforehand. And it's like you lost a part of yourself whenever, if you got blasted by Ghost Rider's hellfire. And so basically Johnny Blaze kind of gave Ghost Rider the go-ahead to essentially have a life of some sort, since he was like a demon from hell. But on the other hand, the Ghost Rider reluctantly agreed to let Johnny Blaze basically try and have a life of his own. But this being a demon from hell versus, say, an ordinary human being, while they did have a compromise of sorts, and they did seem to work on the side of good, it's just that this hellish nature kept on biting Johnny in the ass. And so, amongst other things, he had essentially been humbled in his spot as a world-class motorcycle stunt performer, and that was like one of the few aspects of his identity that he for a time could hold on to, and gave him some measure of peace and clarity until he was actually defeated by a rival stunt performer and named Flag Fargo. And while Flag Fargo was a bit of a jerk-ass, he actually was a legitimately talented stunt cyclist, whereas Johnny Blaze had basically lost focus over the span of several issues. And I mean, while he had been riding cross country on his motorcycle, he had been caught up and kind of feeling sorry for himself, and sort of, I mean, yes, he still had the title of world-class stunt performer, but Flag Fargo, once he and Johnny Blaze had a contest, Flag Fargo ended up beating Johnny Blaze fair and square. And so while Johnny Blaze, I mean, he initially seemed to take it in stride, it really messed with his psyche, because like this was one of the few pieces of his personality that he was able to hold on to, even when Ghost Rider was making a ruckus of his life. But now that that was gone, he's just kind of wandering the country, going from place to place, trying to settle down, but it just keeps on, the cycle keeps repeating, so to speak. And so this is where I mean, and personally, like, I don't think that there was anything wrong with that, sort of like at times, the series on a whole kind of felt like one big road movie, in the sense that, Johnny Blaze, goes from one town to another, and, kind of like, the original television series of The Incredible Hulk, with Bill Bixby as Bruce Banner and Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk. There was a certain formula to that, wherein, a tragically cursed individual in one way or another is, going from town to town, trying to run from, their own inner demons, both literally and figuratively, but, they keep on getting caught up in, the drama of someone else, and while they might actually do some good, they also cause a lot of harm in the process. And it's more so in Ghost Rider's case that this dark side comes out, because, as I've mentioned, Ghost Rider is literally a demon from hell, and he's latched on to Johnny Blaze's soul, because of Mephisto's machinations. This sort of feel of a road movie, it's not necessarily bad in and of itself. But the problem is, while, writing a character who has a sense of aimlessness, isn't a bad thing in and of itself. In fact, oftentimes it can be a very relatable experience to read about, a character going through a sense of aimlessness in their life. The problem is when you've got an ongoing series that had, up to a certain point, been a very exciting and relatable in some strange way. You go from that to a character going for several issues on end, not having a purpose. And at that point, I think a series, whichever the series would be, becomes very static. And unfortunately, the majority of the issues collected in this volume suffer from that problem, at least in my opinion. And like I said, there are some good issues that are collected in here, but the majority of them are very much filler, because it really does feel like the series becomes kind of aimless. Things happen, and yes, there's interactions with all sorts of people, but there's really no sense of, I'm not going to say there's no sense of urgency, but for the most part, there's very little sense of urgency. And I really think that might have been because, Michael Fleischer might have been running out of steam for the Ghost Rider series, creatively speaking. And unfortunately, when a writer runs out of steam, sometimes you can tell. And the art teams that are put together here, they generally tend to do a good job of, at the very least, making the Ghost Rider series look consistently good. And it is still, neat to look at. But at the same time, there were a couple of times where I just found myself kind of, if not nodding off, then at the very least, I found myself not really getting immersed in the stories. Like say with a good portion of the stories back in Volume 2 of the Essential Ghost Rider, when the series was really beginning to find its footing, I started to really get drawn in. And, that was where I was like, okay, I definitely see why there's a lot of fondness for the original Ghost Rider series, because when it was good, it was good. But unfortunately, this is at a point where, it's like, Michael Fleischer, I guess, had hit that creative high with the Ghost Rider series, but unfortunately, here he was kind of, going, downwards, so to speak. And, and just unfortunately with the majority of the stories, you can tell, because, as I said, a lot of the stories in Volume 2, as exciting and outlandish as they could be at times. This is, old school Marvel for you, but they could also be very relatable because they did such a good job of fleshing out the character of Johnny Blaze. But unfortunately here, though, because I guess of the static writing or the static stories that are taking up the majority of the book, I started to kind of have vibes that were akin to reading Essential Ghost Rider Volume 1, in which, if you have checked out my review on that book, the writing on the majority of those stories was just not good. Like, there were some good ideas and there were some interesting things that they tried to do with the character, but unfortunately, due to a lack of stable creative teams, you kept on having different directions being thrown at the Ghost Rider series. And while there'd be moments where you could see what the creative teams were going for, the stories tended to be very over the top, and not in a good way, and very shall we say overwrought, with I guess you could say cliche writing, or less than stellar character designs for the villains and things like that. And so, yeah, I started really having, kind of flashbacks to Volume 1. And so while I will say that at the very least, there were times where Volume 1 managed to have moments of interest, such as, say, for instance, introductions of certain characters who, in some circles, are regarded as, say, classic, Ghost Rider villains or cast members, or classic moments such as, say, Ghost Rider, or while still in the persona of Johnny Blaze, learning how to use his powers to make a hell flame motorcycle, or say like the introduction of the character of Witch Woman. While you have classic moments like that, you didn't really have anything in the way of good stories. Whereas in this volume, at least, as blasé and filler as the majority of the stories are here, there are a couple of stories that are legitimately good, that at the very least, you see where, there's still some creative magic going on, so to speak. But unfortunately, for the most part, it's just one of those things where it's like you start off strong. You start off rather well. Issue 51 the main story is Diesel of Doom, which, definitely an old school horror title for sure. But it's basically kind of it's definitely a quote unquote monster of the week type of title, in the sense that Johnny Blaze ends up meeting sort of an urban legend, this ghostly truck driver who because of how he was murdered a long time ago by a gang of bikers. Basically, he's going on the road at night, running motorcyclists down, and for the most part, he's going after motorcyclists who are straight up criminal bikers. And he initially goes after Ghost Rider, because Ghost Rider is on a motorcycle and he looks like a biker, and well, he kind of is a demon from hell. But then again, when he switches to Johnny Blaze, the same ghostly truck driver actually ends up helping him out, because at this point he had been injured and left for dead, and so the guy actually brings him into his truck. And there's a really surreal moment where Johnny Blaze is sort of talking with the guy, but he's wondering what the heck is going on here, because everything about the guy's truck is from, say, like a decade earlier, and like some of even the radio station advertisements are from something that was like a decade ago. And so he knows that something's going on here. But then at the end of the story, he actually does find out that this guy was essentially a ghost. And basically, while he does go around the road killing bikers, like I said, who almost are always criminal bikers, he also helps people who are on the side of the road and in danger or injured, or like their car's gone out or something like that. And so I really liked that story because Ghost Rider is a character that really thrives on the whole urban legend narrative. Like he you read his stories, like, and at his best, it's like something that you're at, like, say for instance you're in the Marvel universe and you're at a bar on the on the rural road somewhere, and you start talking with some people, and maybe the subject comes up of some crazy things we've seen over the years, and then suddenly someone starts talking about the Ghost Rider, and maybe you, as just an ordinary citizen within the Marvel universe, I mean, you've never seen the Ghost Rider yourself, but you certainly heard of him, and at first you're thinking it's just some random crazy thing that's going on with all these superheroes and supervillains, but then you start to hear from these people like stories about this biker genuinely being something from hell, because anyone who's gone up against him and has lived, it's like they've become a shell of themselves, and it's like you hear about stuff like this. And so it's like this urban legend feeling just really kind of works with the character. And so I really liked how, in this particular story, it was like, one urban legend was meeting another. And so I thought that was actually a really, nice little, twist to it. I mean, you can kind of predict how the story's going to go, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling too much. But at the same time, it just really felt like something that was right at home within the setting of the Ghost Riders series. And so that just as people within that story are passing on the story of this ghostly truck driver who on one hand murders bikers, but on the other hand helps people who are genuinely in trouble, it's like you just know that the story of Ghost Rider is being further embellished and added on, and passed down to all these other people who have either seen him in passing or personally witnessed him in action. And so, I mean, that was probably, in my opinion, one of the best stories that came out in this, that was collected in this volume. And that's definitely a point where Michael Fleischer did a good job as a writer. And plus, Don Perlin was still on hand to do the artwork, and he does the artwork for the majority of the stories in here, by the way, up to let's see, give me a moment here, gotta collect my notes. Okay, yeah, so Don Perlin, the artist who did a significant portion of the artwork for the issues collected in the last volume, did the artwork for the stories that were issues 51 through 58, which definitely makes up the bulk of this volume. So anyway, though, after 51, though, that's unfortunately when the series begins to kind of go downhill and have the problems that I have mentioned, beforehand, before talking about issue 51. It's basically you get this static feeling. The writing seems to be sort of I guess you could say lacking in urgency or incentive, and a lot of been there done that starts to come into play. Like it's funny because like issue 51 is definitely one of the good stories in this volume, but then issue 52, the immediate following issue, it's like night and day, because you have this definitely a monster of the week type of story, and you have it's basically there are these Greek sirens that are somehow in America that that Ghost Rider ends up going up against. And the sirens are, and as far as mythology goes, sirens are very dangerous creatures, and they are a very unique a group, race of creatures, within mythology, because like they're 9 times out of 10, it's like they're beautiful women who lured men to their deaths through seduction, and sometimes they actually have a demonic visage to them. But this being the Marvel Universe, I guess I shouldn't, be too confused as to, what Greek sirens are doing in America. But at the same time, it's like, okay, this might have actually been this might have actually worked better if this was in a Marvel fantasy series as opposed to, say, a contemporary, road book, which Ghost Rider was at the time. And so, and also like the fact that a lot of the action takes place in the daytime, at least as how it looks like it's taking place in the daytime, considering the stories collected here are in black and white, so sometimes it's kind of hard to tell when it is night and when it's day, but it seems like the majority of the action takes place during the day. So you have like a group of antagonists who on one hand feel very out of place within the Ghost Rider setting, but you also have the majority of the action taking place in brightly lit areas. And Ghost Rider, I mean, yes, there have been times where Ghost Rider has been in the sunlight and what have you, but for the most part, Ghost Rider is at its best when the environment is in shadow and dark, and that just basically adds to the whole urban legend aspect of things. Whereas because the story is straight up in daytime, it feels like something that was from like the 50s or 60s in terms of like how the sirens are written. Like that, it's that level of writing for their characters. But yeah, so I'm not going to go like over every single story in here. It's just mainly because I'm honestly not that enthusiastic about the majority of the stories in here, because most of them are in fact filler. But it's just, unfortunately though, I really think that in this case though, it's like night and day. You got 51, issue 51, which was a good issue, and I genuinely liked it. It was a good way to start off this collection here. But issue 52 though was one of the worst issues in this volume, and I would say even one of the worst issues within this series. And so, yeah, it just gets to a point where after that, for a good solid amount of the stories here, the character of Johnny Blaze just feels very aimless and thrown into random situations, and it gets to a point where I would say that like the most interesting sense of character development didn't really come from him or Ghost Rider, but it actually came from, oddly enough, probably one of the worst villains in the Ghost Rider franchise, the Water Wizard, that was introduced, back, in Volume 2. And the Water Wizard has definitely gone on to be known as a character who has probably one of the worst creative costuming designs ever put to the page. But he does have an interesting power, though, in the sense that he's able to manipulate water to become like some sort of golem of some sort. Like he's able to manipulate water into, say, becoming like a form of like a monster of some kind. And it's like he could he could control like a small amount of water and suddenly turn it into like a giant hand coming at you, stuff like that. Except he also literally would form water monsters to go after Ghost Rider. And so while his character looked ridiculous, and the way he was written, you really couldn't take him seriously as a villain, simply because of how I guess you could say out of place he was within a horror setting. I will say that his use of his power, his ability, was genuinely fascinating, because just the idea of what he could do. Plus, whenever the artists were drawing him using his power, they got to really cut loose, and you saw some really neat little monsters, being formed out of water. And so, but other than that, though, he was kind of treated as a joke, because if the Water Wizard had been in a book like, say, I don't know, like Iron Man or Spider-Man or the Avengers, I mean, he probably wouldn't be out of place. I mean, he'd be still look ridiculous, unfortunately, but he'd be more at home in a series like that. But one of the interesting things about his character was that because he was in a Ghost Rider series, the Ghost Rider series, which is definitely a horror title, when the creative teams, are on their game, they know that Ghost Rider is a horror title, and they make sure that it's a horror title. And one of the interesting things about the Water Wizard was that, he was thinking that he was going up against, an average Joe superhero, but nope, he's going up against a demon from hell. And so his reappearance here in this volume, he's in a couple of stories actually, and it's very interesting seeing his character development because initially when he tries to go up against Ghost Rider again, like he's tried practicing using his powers more, but Ghost Rider literally just laughs him off. And so Water Wizard's he's in a state of depression. He's like, he's right, I'm a joke. and everyone else is right, I'm a joke. What am I doing with my life? Because every time he tries to use his power for crime, he ends up getting his ass kicked. In this case, he ends up getting his ass kicked by a demon from hell. So not only is he getting, getting stomped, but he's getting terrified as well. And so there's a point, I think it was in let's see, Moon Over Dark Water, issue 59. And that's definitely a story that I hesitate to call it a good story, but it's definitely, considering that the majority of the stories in between issue 51 and this issue 59 were very forgettable. This story actually manages to stand out in the sense that you have this bit of character development, and even though you have this C-list supervillain who actually turns out to be have a more interesting arc at this point than Johnny Blaze is having, it definitely makes the story memorable. But anyway, though, the Water Wizard ends up joining forces with a sorcerer named Moondark, who in one of the earlier issues collected in this volume had tried to take out Ghost Rider and basically use Ghost Rider's hell-based power for himself. Ended up getting his ass kicked. But to be fair, Ghost Rider was actually helped by the spirit of the original Ghost Rider, Carter Slade, or as he's called in this volume, the Knight Rider, because there was some sort of legal copyright reasons at the time. But anyway, though, that's I'll get to that in a little bit. But so Moondark had gotten his ass kicked, but then he sees in the Water Wizard, the perfect pawn, a guy who does have a considerable ability, but is a kind of a joke as far as being he's very lacking in his success as far as trying to be a criminal and what have you. And so the Moondark says, hey, let's team up, and the thing is, I can use my powers to augment yours to where you're not just going to get Ghost Rider wet, you're going to actually hurt him. And sure enough, once the two of them join forces, Moondark, I wasn't really like won over with him as a character, because he was very mustache twirling, type of character. But he is able to augment Water Wizard's powers to the point where when Ghost Rider crosses paths with him again, he's initially like, hey, dude, I told you, if you give this up, because you're not cut out for this. You really want to go to hell? And so, but then he's caught off guard because, when Water Wizard starts, attacking him, this time his power is actually doing some damage to him. Not to a point where, Ghost Rider's in fear of his life or anything like that, but he knows that something's different, and he's actually, putting up a fight this time. And And so yeah, it's a really fascinating moment because you see Water Wizard just going from one emotional extreme to another, and he ends up getting cocky, and unfortunately at this point when Moondark is he's watching all this because it is his plan after all, and Water Wizard's his pawn. He starts to plot to screw over Water Wizard as soon as Ghost Rider's weakened enough for him to start directly assaulting him with his magic. And sure enough, that does happen. But Moondark makes the mistake of a lot of other would-be soul stealers or magic stealers by trying to directly attack a demon from hell. And so Ghost Rider actually does manage to hurt Moondark enough to where Moondark withdraws to, I guess you could say, his this sort of spiritual dimension, wherein like he's able to hide from his enemies, namely in this case Ghost Rider. And as soon as he splits from this reality, that's when Water Wizard's power starts to revert back to its ordinary amount of strength. Namely, yes, Water Wizard's still able to use his power to create water golems and cause damage and what have you, but unfortunately, because they're now being augmented by Moondark's magic, well, this time he goes from actually doing damage to Ghost Rider to, he's just splashing water at Ghost Rider. And so at this point, Ghost Rider's really pissed off, and he makes damn sure to give Water Wizard a full dose of his hellfire. Not to a point where he kills him or burns him, but to a point where he basically, burns his soul, and just emotionally and psychologically shatters the guy. And so, that was actually an interesting story, and not so much, like I said, not so much for Johnny Blaze and Ghost Rider or anything like that, because it was kind of business as usual for them, but it was more for the bit of character development you get with Water Wizard. And so you have a story like this, and you follow Water Wizard for a couple of other issues after this, namely issues 61, let's see, it's Wizardous Waters Run Deep, and issue 62, Menace of the Oil Gins. And the reason that those two stories are rather interesting is because Johnny Blaze finds himself in this rural town that's going through a water crisis. Like they're being hit by this water drought, to a point where people are literally fighting over water, and because that's how limited in supply it is. And so he finds out that there actually is a body of water that is underneath the town, but unfortunately, according to the government, it's too expensive for them to try and drill to that point, because it's so far down. And so, Johnny Blaze, he's thinking how ridiculous this all sounds. And so, but that's bureaucracy for you. And so, he, excuse me. And so he has the, if not exactly bright idea, it is an intriguing idea. He decides to try and spring or Water Wizard from the psychiatric ward that he's in, the prison that he's staying at. It's like a prison mental hospital type place. And initially, he actually does try to, appeal to the head of the facility, explain the situation and he actually goes out of his way to say, hey, I'm the one who actually, caught Water Wizard. But this is a point in time, I think, where, Johnny Blaze, because of this, lack of purpose that he had been having, in the majority of the prior issues, he wasn't really thinking clearly. Like, he was just thinking with his heart. Like, he was wanting to actually help people out. And he's thinking that he could just do it as Johnny Blaze, but he sort of blurs the line between what Ghost Rider did and what he did, because at that point, the head of the hospital or the facility is telling him that that's BS, because this guy, this water wizard, was found by the police on the side of the road, and he was in a traumatized state. So you didn't bring him in, the police did. And so, at that point, Johnny Blaze is just kind of laughed out of the place by the doctor. And so, he that's when he figures, okay, I'm gonna turn to Ghost Rider to do this. But he's hoping that he has just enough willpower to have some sort of control over Ghost Rider, because he knows that Ghost Rider is going to want to cause all sorts of havoc, and he knows that Ghost Rider is going to recognize Water Wizard. But Johnny Blaze was still able to exercise some form of control, to a point where he could limit the amount of damage that Ghost Rider did. And so Ghost Rider actually springs Water Wizard from the prison or hospital facility, and of course Water Wizard's pissing his pants, and Ghost Rider's basically saying that you're going to help me, and here's why. And so at that point he actually does turn it back into Johnny Blaze and lets Johnny Blaze take over. And Johnny Blaze explains the situation to Water Wizard about the town going through a water crisis. And at first, Water Wizard, he's sort of caught in between being traumatized by what Ghost Rider put him through, versus why the heck should I help you? Why would I do this? For these random people I've never met. And that's when Johnny Blaze actually makes a very good point. And in my opinion, this is definitely a point where, while Michael Fleischer's, the majority of Michael Fleischer's stories in this volume were very lacking in, say, urgency or life, this is a very good moment on Johnny Blaze's part, because he actually calls Water Wizard out on his attitude, and he sorry, give me a second, because I'd like to actually read the dialogue here. It's not like Oscar-winning dialogue by any means, but at the same time, it's one of those like kick in the butt types of dialogues that actually gets a character to be like, you know what, I need to stop feeling sorry for myself and do something with my life. But let's see. Okay, so dialogue by Michael Fleischer, and this is in issue 62. Give me a sec here, let me just make sure. I stand corrected. It's in issue 61. And so at this point, Johnny Blaze is talking to Water Wizard, trying to plead his case and say, look, you can actually do something positive here. But here's a page. Okay. So he says, listen, you creep, ever since you acquired those water controlling powers of yours, you've been using them for evil. Did it ever occur to you you might use those same powers to help people? Right here, for the first time in your life, you've got a chance to do something decent. It'll take you all 5 minutes to bring up that water, and then I'll ride you safely back to the hospital. Now, I can't force you, I suppose, but if you've any humanity left in you at all, you'll... And at this point, Water Wizard is just like, all right, Blaze, all right, stop sounding off like a sanctimonious scoutmaster. I'll do it. And so like that little moment like there, I really liked, because, here's Johnny Blaze who, time and again, he's tried to use the hellborn power of Ghost Rider to actually do some good. And while sometimes he has been able to do so, because, well, he's literally working with a demon from hell, unfortunately that kind of backfires a good amount of the time. But here he is talking with a supervillain who, the guy is a supervillain, or he's a criminal, but he's not, say, attached to, say, a demon from hell. Like, he has his own powers. Like, he's not demonically tainted. Like, he can actually use his powers however he wants to. And, and Johnny Blaze is trying to say, dude, you've got a fresh opportunity here. And that was actually a really good moment, in my opinion. As far as, both, I guess you could say, for Johnny Blaze, as well as, Water Wizard. Simply because, it's just, that was definitely a bright spot in this book. And the next issue, 62, this was definitely one of the more bizarre issues. It's called the Menace of the Oil Gins, because at this point, things go from rural America all the way to the Middle East, wherein it turns out that at the end of the issue of issue 61, the Wizardous Waters Run Deep, where Johnny Blaze is getting Water Wizard to actually help the townspeople out, which incidentally he does. But at the end of the issue, he's actually kidnapped by a group of criminals that are working for this would-be Arab dictator, because he's trying to basically overthrow I guess you could say the ruling parties of the Middle East, to where he has his own he'll have his own empire, and he's kind of like I would say he's a dictator, like in the say vein of someone like Saddam Hussein or Ayatollah Khomeini or something like that, and so not a nice guy, but he does he's able to actually kidnap the Water Wizard, and the Water Wizard is reluctant to be a part of this, because it's like first he's a pawn of Moondark the magician, then he's a pawn of Johnny Blaze / Ghost Rider, and now he's a pawn of these would-be Middle Eastern dictators. But one of the interesting things about him in this particular story is that you actually see him being able to use his powers in a different way. Like, it's not just limited to water. Like, he's actually able to use it for oil. And so you have these sort of like oil golems, or these black orb-eyed creatures that are going to all these oil facilities in the Middle East and destroying them, just so that this dictator excuse me, will have all the cards. And so it was rather a change of pace, and a bizarre one at that, to go from rural America all the way to the Middle East. But you see Johnny Blaze going, he's out of his element for sure, and it's kind of funny seeing him in his stunt cyclist outfit and leathers, sort of mingling with the people sort of in the Arab crowd. And some of them are kind of just looking. I'm like, what? So I like that little visual moments like that. But then the character called the Arabian Knight comes into the story, and the Arabian Knight, I don't know a whole lot about him, but Marvel created him as kind of an Arabic superhero, and I actually thought that was pretty cool, because when you think of the Marvel universe, most of the time, the heroes are kind of the Earth-based heroes are, say, American, or for the most part, or they're based in America. Like, they might be from other places, but they're based in America. But every now and then, though, you have characters like, say, Black Panther, or someone like that, like someone who's actually from another country, and has, like, while they might work in America from time to time, they have their base of operations in another country. And so I think there was a storyline in the Hulk series at the time, wherein Bruce Banner / the Hulk ended up in Arabia, and made the acquaintance of the Arabian Knight, which is where the character was introduced. And the guy is he literally has a flying carpet and a mystical scimitar. And so it's basically like Aladdin on steroids without the genie, though. So I thought that the Arabian Knight was actually a very interesting character, simply from a cultural standpoint. And he's only in that one story in this volume of Ghost Rider, and you have the sort of cliche situation of him, initially thinking that Ghost Rider was the threat, that because he sees the oil gins, and he sees Ghost Rider kind of in the same vicinity, and he mistakes them for all being in the same league with one another. But then of course you have the moments where Johnny Blaze is able to sort of exert his influence on Ghost Rider, and to a point where the Arabian Knight is beginning to wonder, what's going on with this guy, because I thought he was like a straight up, demon like these djinns were. But then he finds out that, the Ghost Rider and Johnny Blaze are one and the same. And so, I mean, you have like one of those moments like that tends to happen with other characters throughout the series, wherein they realize that, like say Dr. Druid back in Volume 2, I mean, he realizes that while, yes, the Ghost Rider is a demon from hell, I mean, he's tied to Johnny Blaze, who is a legitimately good person and is trying to do the right thing. And so the two of them actually end up working together to end the would-be dictator's schemes and shut down Water Wizard's efforts in trying to be a criminal once again. But I liked how there was also a little bit of a side story in this same story, wherein Johnny Blaze, like, he's the reason he ends up going to Arabia after Water Wizard is because he feels that it's his responsibility to recapture him, because he is the one, as Ghost Rider, who sprung Water Wizard from that prison hospital. And because of that, Water Wizard was kidnapped by the would-be dictator. And so if Ghost Rider hadn't sprung him, I mean, okay, he might sprung... Water Wizard might have still been sprung from the prison hospital by the Arab dictator's goons, but on the other hand, though, because Ghost Rider was the one who did it, well, he was much easier to find. And so anyway, he feels like, I mean, on one hand, yes, he was able to persuade the Water Wizard to help that town out, the one that was going through the water drought, and then or the water crisis. But on the other hand, though, because the Water Wizard is using his powers in a new way to cause all sorts of destruction in another part of the world, I mean, he's like, okay, I've got to stop him myself. And so he and Flag Fargo, the stunt cyclist he lost his title to, end up crossing paths once more. And so in desperation, he actually asks Flag Fargo for a loan. He basically says, look, I'm flat broke, but I need to get to the Middle East, and I need you to help me out. I'll owe you a favor. And so Flag Fargo, he's kind of like intrigued by this, but he's like, okay, yeah, sure, but here's the thing. It's like, I'll give you the money you need, to get to fly into the Middle East, but if you're not back by this, that, or the other amount of time, your motorcycle is mine. And so, for a biker like Johnny Blaze, I mean, that's really rubbing salt in the wound. And so he's like, all right, I'll do it. And so he's like, they agree to it. And so that's how Johnny Blaze is able to get into the Middle East. But anyway, once the crisis is over there, in that situation, he and the Arabian Knight actually kind of strike up a camaraderie, and Johnny Blaze, is and Arabian Knight is asking him if there's anything that he can do in return, for helping his country out. And so Johnny Blaze says, well, actually, now that you mention it, yeah, I'm in a bit of a bind. And he tells the Arabian Knight of his situation, that he used the amount of money that he was given to get over to the Middle East. I mean, yeah, it got him over there, but he doesn't have jack squat to get back. And so he basically says, I can help you with that. And so he goes over to the would-be Arabian dictator, who's on the ground flat on his back at this point, and stunned to try and retaliate or anything. So the Arabian Knight takes this expensive jewel that the guy has on him, and he's got several, and so he says, take this to the person you owe money to. It will more than cover your debt. And so as far as you getting back in time, I think I can help you with that. And I love this. He actually loans Johnny Blaze his flying carpet. And it's such a really cool moment. And also I like the little detail of the guys on the ground, the would-be dictators on the ground. And he's saying, it's okay, just take it. Okay, I'll just go ahead and read it out here if y'all don't mind. This is in issue 62. So basically, let's see. Here's the pages I was going to read here. Okay, so here's where the Arabian Knight chimes in. He's like, all of Saudi Arabia owes you its thanks, Johnny. Had it not been for you and your demon, our country might well have fallen to Sheikh Harani and his minions. And Johnny says, I'm glad your problem's solved then. I only wish mine were. To what problem do you prefer, Johnny? Perhaps in some way the Arabian Knight might be of service to you. Well, I guess this is just going to sound awfully trivial, but you see, I borrowed the money to fly here from a guy named Flag Fargo, and unless I get back home and repay him within just a few hours' time, I stand to lose a pretty valuable motorcycle. Ah, then I can help you. Why don't you merely repay your debt with this glittering ruby? And see right here, like he's literally just swiped it off the guy. It's like, consider it a loan. If you like to be repaid 50 or 60 years from now, when Sheikh Harini gets out of prison. And Harini's all like, yes, please, take it. And as for your returning home in time to meet your creditor's stringent deadline, I think I may have a way to help you there too. Commercial airlines can be so undependable after all. Okay, so then you got Flag Fargo here, sort of strutting his stuff in Vegas, and he's, very, confident that he's about to get a new cycle, and he's about to get another one over Johnny Blaze. And so, hours later, back in the United States, another 5 or 6 minutes and it'll all be over. I already checked the airline schedules. There's no way Blaze can possibly fly into Indy till early morning, which means that snazzy little bike of his is about to become my permanent property. It's a nifty little mount, too. Just what I... Okay, so here he is, checking it out right here. And here comes Johnny Blaze on the carpet. Right there. Not counting your chickens before they're hatched, are you, Fargo? Huh? Blaze? In the flesh, Fargo. Here, this'll more than repay you for the money you loaned me. You can take what's left over and give it to your favorite charity. And so I love this little moment because Johnny Blaze, he literally is coming back to America from Arabia on a flying carpet. And it just, within, the whole Marvel universe, this is it's a moment that actually works. Just for, because of how crazy the Marvel universe is, how many things you've got, how many, you've got magic, you've got, science, and all sorts of stuff, and pure technology. And so why shouldn't there be, an Arabian, a flying carpet? You got a demon from hell, and you got a flying carpet. You do the math. But yeah, so, yeah, it was just, that was actually, as seemingly, sudden and random as it was to, throw Johnny Blaze into the Middle East, they actually managed to make it work. And plus, with, even though Arabian Knight was only in this one story, they really did a good job of giving you a glimpse into another culture, with, his character and how, seriously, he took it in terms of, defending his country from threats, whether, they were domestic or abroad. And so I liked how, he and Johnny Blaze, kind of parted as friends. And so, see, this is the point where, you have a whole bunch of, sort of non-urgent filler issues after 51, but then, it's like towards the end of this volume, things actually start to get good again. And so then you got issue 63, which is also, the cover art that's used for this issue, this volume here. But 63, it's called If the Eyes Destroy Me. And this is where we have, as far as the original Ghost Rider series is concerned, the final appearance of the Orb, who was a fellow stunt cyclist, but who was a rival to Johnny Blaze's surrogate father, and had actually tried to kill him, but was horrifically disfigured when it backfired on him. And so in revenge, he had tried to kill Johnny Blaze, who had at this point just turned into Ghost Rider, and and Johnny Blaze had actually teamed up with Spider-Man and to defeat the Orb. And I actually talked about that in my review of Volume 1, because when the Orb shows up, it's confusing, because he refers to the events that happened in an issue of Marvel Team Up, which was a Spider-Man title in which Spider-Man would team up with different characters in the Marvel universe, in just about every issue. And one particular issue, he and Ghost Rider teamed up to take on the Orb, and that was where the Orb made his first appearance. But unfortunately, that story, since it was, you would think that they would have that story in a book called Essential Ghost Rider, Volume 1, right? But it wasn't. Instead, you had, stories that, the Ghost Rider stories where the Orb showed up, it's like they took place after that story, but you don't have his introductory story in there. But in the times that the Orb showed up, putting aside that awkwardness of not having been able to have seen his original appearance in any of the volumes, for the most part, he definitely tended to be one of his Ghost Rider's most persistent foes, because he also stood out because he wasn't supernatural in any way. He was a very talented stunt cyclist who was caught up in a cycle of misplaced vengeance, because he has no one to blame but himself for the accident that's hideously disfigured his face, but he keeps trying to kill Johnny Blaze in some way or another, and he through various means was able to either construct the technology himself or use technology that someone else had given him to use this helmet that was literally like an eyeball to either emit laser blasts or hypnotize people. And in fact, in Volume 2, the Orb's the one appearance that the Orb had in that volume was when he one of the things he did to sort of rub salt in Johnny Blaze's wounds was he made his girlfriend Roxanne Simpson, forget who she was, as well as who Johnny. I'm sorry. Anyway, okay, so the Orb when we saw him in Volume 2, had used his powers. He had modified his helmet to hypnotize people, and he had used this capability to hypnotize Roxanne Simpson into forgetting not only who she was, but who Johnny Blaze was. And so, as far as Johnny Blaze knows, she's more or less vanished off the face of the earth, and as far as he knows, has ditched him. And so, because this is a point in time where the two of them were initially trying to reconcile their relationship, but when she doesn't, show up to meet him, and plus he has all sorts of other stuff going on too. He's sort of just kind of in his mind, he's thinking, okay, well, she's chosen to move on, not knowing that the Orb's the one who did this to her. And you don't see her character until towards the end of the series. But anyway, yeah. So the Orb is definitely one of the most persistent mortal enemies, in the literal sense of the word, of mortal, that Johnny Blaze / Ghost Rider has. And while the orb does show up in this volume here, in one of the issues prior to issue 63, his appearance in that issue just really wasn't that good in my opinion. And there was also like a bunch of soap opera elements involving like another would-be, love interest of Johnny Blaze that was kind of thrown in, and it just kind of detracted from the story. And I mean, that's another thing that happens in the stories that are kind of in the filler stories that take up the majority of the book, up until this point in the book, up until the latter portion of the book. There's like a lot of kind of pseudo soap opera elements, in the sense that Johnny Blaze, because of his constant drifting, is constantly meeting a different woman, and there's like they fall in love, but then Ghost Rider comes between them in some way. It's wash, rinse, repeat. So that particular, the story that the orb showed up in prior to issue 63, it really wasn't a good story, because I mean, of the soap opera element, plus the fact that the orb's scheme in that particular story just felt random and thrown in. But issue 63, though, this is sort of where I guess the creative team of Michael Fleischer and guest artist Luke McDonnell. Luke McDonnell, incidentally, did the majority of the artwork for one of my absolute favorite series, the John Ostrander run of the Suicide Squad for DC Comics. Check that series out. It's good. Both Suicide Squad movies actually got a lot of their inspiration from that era of the Suicide Squad, the John Ostrander and Luke McDonnell run. But anyway, though, so it's really cool seeing the guy who worked on the Suicide Squad, later on, doing a guest shot at illustrating a Ghost Rider story, and his artwork's actually pretty good. But anyway, though, in this story, it's like, I don't know if Michael Fleischer knew that this was going to be the last time that the orb showed up in the series, or if he had planned it like that. But there is a sense of finality in this story, because there's like a certain intensity that comes into play when the orb is basically in this time trying to go all out on taking out Ghost Rider, and he even uses the services of a familiar face, the underworld weapons dealer and criminal mastermind Madame Menace, who we last saw in the Machine Man series. She has a brief appearance in this story as the one who is giving him the stronger weapons that he's going to be using on the Ghost Rider. And it turns out that he's actually able to put up a pretty good fight, once he's, lures Ghost Rider to him, and he uses this, new and improved weaponry. And it's like, you see this guy who's just become like this Captain Ahab figure, and Ghost Rider is Moby Dick, the whale. And he manages to do some damage. And granted, I mean, unfortunately, for the orb, Ghost Rider, being a demon from hell, is eventually able to just kind of walk it off, and the wounds kind of heal themselves and everything, because they're not like supernatural based. But there's just enough firepower and strength behind said firepower to, for a time, put Ghost Rider down on the ground for the count. And so it was really it was a lot more intense than I was expecting for comic book from this time, because you just see how crazed and determined the orb is to have his vengeance, albeit misplaced vengeance, on Ghost Rider, because it's just it's pretty it's something that really stands out in the sea of disposable villains. And the fact that this is just an ordinary human, albeit with some souped up advanced technology, being the one to actually give Ghost Rider a run for his money, was pretty impressive. But Ghost Rider, this being his book and everything, he eventually does kind of get a second wind, and basically takes apart the Orb's gang, and and once again gives the orb a blast of hellfire. This isn't the first time he's done this to the orb, and so at this point you kind of feel sorry for the guy. But yeah, it just this is definitely while I still say that the majority of the issues in this volume just aren't that memorable. Once you get past those, once you get towards the final portion of the book, things actually start to get good again. And 63, I think, was definitely one of the stronger issues that's collected in this volume. But yeah, so give me a sec here. Da, 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 da. But yeah, I just wanted to show y'all some stuff here. Okay. So, this is Luke McDonald's artwork in action here. Okay, so basically at this point, just to kind of give you some context, Ghost Rider has gone through the hypnotized gang of bikers that the orb is using as kind of meat shields between him and Ghost Rider, and at this point, once they've been enough of a distraction, he takes the fight to Ghost Rider himself. So once again, I'll read. Bah! Let the Ghost Rider have his fun. Henchmen like these are a dime a dozen. Besides, his easy triumph over these idiots may serve to make the demon smug, overconfident, and less equipped to withstand my awesome onslaught. And so at this point, he takes a shot at Ghost Rider with his helmet, and Ghost Rider's like, "Fear not, I haven't forgotten you, vermin. Soon I shall lay my fiery hands upon you, and you shall feel my soul-withering wrath." And back to the orb. "It's no use. My laser blasts are more powerful than ever, yet he rides too swiftly, too skillfully for me to score the direct hit I need to destroy him. But no amount of cycling and skill can escape my secret weapon." And at this point, the orb starts firing these, orbs at him. And Ghost Rider's, by the lords of Hades, that missile, I cannot evade it. It's gaining on me. I cannot override it. It's going to, and then it just latches onto him. And, it says, finding its target, the fiery-eyed missile flares like a miniature nova, and it takes Ghost Rider out. Like, literally throws him to the ground off his cycle. It's like, pain so intense. Ha! That was a sample of my power, demon. Taste now the awesome might of your all-powerful arch-enemy. Taste now the full unfettered vengeance of the orb. And so, if one of these things was enough to flatten Ghost Rider, he fires like about a dozen of these things at him. And they all just latch onto him. And like, you see Ghost Rider, and he's literally in pain. And that's not something you see from Immortal Enemy on a regular basis within the Ghost Rider series. Engulfed by the fiery eyes, the Ghost Rider convulses in searing agony. So, here we go. The orb is seemingly victorious, but at long last, I have destroyed Ghost Rider. Vengeance belongs to the orb. No one could possibly survive the searing heat of my eye missiles. He's as good as dead. But then, his suit still smoldering, his eyes glazed with maniacal fury, the brimstone biker slowly rises. No, it's not possible. Mortal fool, you have underestimated my power for the last time. Your puny efforts can never defeat one such as I, for I am no earthly being. I am a creature spawned in the deepest fiery pits of hell.
You have challenged me once too often, mortal. I am sick of this futile charade. This time, I shall end your meddling once and for all. No! No! Stay back! He's still staggered by the pain of the eye missiles. I better make a break for it now while he's still too weak to follow.
But I'm sorry, I love this artwork here, okay? I mean, the black and white just kind of brings out, the amount of detail that's put into it. But Ghost Rider just looks straight up terrifying here. I mean, you could tell that the guy's in agony. I mean, he's actually battered and, got chunks taken out of him. And yet he's, powering through it. And, granted, yes, he's a demon through hell. I mean, yeah, he's going to power through it anyway. But there is a certain human element, this determination to fight through the pain, and he actually manages to go through the demonic features here. And then of course you got this lovely shot right there of the Ghost Rider just looking the orb dead on.
Flee if you dare, orb. I shall be right on your heels.
Drawing upon his very life essence, the infernal phantasm creates a motorcycle out of blistering hellfire. And, sure enough, right there, see the flames coming from his hands.
There is no escape, vermin. Nothing that lives can outride the Ghost Rider. He's a fiend, a monster. Even after all the times I've faced him, I never realized how truly depraved he is, until now. I think this time he means to kill me.
A single soul-scathing blast of hellfire overtakes the fleeing orb, hurling him off his bike, withering his very soul. Right there.
Mercy, demon! Mercy! The pain! Ah!
And, okay, I'm not going to try and do the demonic laugh. I probably couldn't do it justice, plus my throat probably couldn't take it.
A being from hell does not possess mercy. With the slightest twitch of my finger, I could snuff your miserable life. But you will suffer more if I allow you to live. Few mortals have dared to face me more than once. But your foolhardiness is almost admirable. Of course I'm not going to make it easy for you or your men to live. A simple blast of hellfire will destroy your transportation. It is 20 miles to the nearest town, orb. Look me up if you survive the walk.
The desert offers no response to the Ghost Rider's taunt. None save for the crackling of fire enveloping twisted metal, and for the pitiful moanings of broken men. But, so yeah, you actually have some legitimately good writing in this issue, and some wonderful guest art by Luke McDonald here. And, of course, seeing Ghost Rider laughing is never a happy sight. It's always a scary one, and Luke McDonald definitely brings the horror out. And I like this little detail here. There's this massive, collection of, melted and slagged motorcycles here, and from the smoke, you see, the skeleton, or the skull shape kind of just coming from it. I thought that was a nice little detail here. But yeah, so another thing about this issue is the first appearance of two things that will become very important fixtures for Ghost Rider, in the final leg of his series. One is the Quentin Carnival, which is where Johnny Blaze ends up in this issue, and it's a carnival, like as it says, it's a carnival, and the cast of characters there end up becoming in the issues following this volume, they end up becoming kind of a surrogate family for Johnny Blaze, and it's something that's very familiar to him since he kind of grew up in the carnival environment, and so it's like going home in a way. And so this is definitely something that will be a source of happiness and a source of tragedy for him. But you see it for the first time here, and the guy who's running the show, I believe his name is Quentin. He makes his first appearance here, as does his initial rival within the carnival, a stunt cyclist named Red Fowler, makes his appearance here for the first time, as does the reporter. Let me see what her name is. Cynthia Randolph. Yeah, she's a reporter who's wanting to do a story on the carny lifestyle, and she's actually a prominent feminist writer, and so this was kind of an interesting perspective, I mean, especially considering when the story was written. And she's a very likable character. She's got spunk. I mean, she's very attractive, but she's also got like a good head on her shoulders too, and so it's interesting, seeing I guess you could say a feminist character at this point in time, just doing her job as a reporter, and of course she ends up developing something of an attraction / friendship with Johnny Blaze, but you don't really see that come into play in this particular issue, but in issues following it. But yeah, so that's another reason why issue 63 was probably one of the more standout issues, because I mean, one, it's the final showdown with the Orb, and the Orb goes out in style, and two, it's the first appearance of the Quentin Carnival as well as Cynthia Randolph. And so 63, say what you will about the majority of the stories in this volume, but 63 was definitely a highlight. And so the actual Ghost Rider stories, at this point, at the end of the book, are actually pretty good. And 64 and 65, you definitely see that's where Cynthia Randolph and Johnny Blaze, they kind of become sort of not quite an item, but there's definitely a romantic attraction between the two. I mean, so there is still that mild soap opera element, but the writing for Cynthia Randolph's character is much better than the other love interests that Johnny Blaze has had, to be perfectly frank. And so as a result, I guess when Michael Fleischer was writing this, I don't know if he actually had input from, say, people who were familiar with feminist reporters or feminist writers or anything like that, but for some reason though, Cynthia Randolph just comes across as a much stronger potential love interest for Johnny Blaze, and because of this natural charisma, I think Johnny Blaze's interactions with her are definitely stronger and more believable than, say, the relationships he had had prior to this point in the series. And of course, I mean, there's a little bit of an intriguing plot point in issue 64, where this demon named Asmodeus, who had tried to who he had tried to enslave the Ghost Rider entity and claim Johnny Blaze's soul in one of the earlier issues within this volume, but that didn't go over very well, because he had a pawn who was kind of a witch woman, / female demon, who was basically kind of a honey trap for Johnny Blaze, but who would manipulate him into, say, turning into Ghost Rider, at which point Asmodeus and his forces would swoop in and steal Johnny Blaze's soul and enslave the Ghost Rider entity. But Asmodeus didn't count on his pawn actually falling in love with Johnny Blaze, and so she ends up sacrificing herself, her life force, to kill the demonic denizens that were attacking Johnny Blaze at that point. And so Johnny Blaze, his soul's still intact, and Ghost Rider is still unenslaved. But this time in issue 64, Asmodeus decides to try again, except he decides to use a fellow colleague, a changeling named Razor, who is sort of like an owl shape. She kind of looks like something of a cross between like a demonic eagle and owl kind of mixed together, but she's able to basically change herself into the appearance of Cynthia, and basically trick Johnny Blaze into kind of a honey trap while in disguise as Cynthia, and thus Johnny Blaze's soul and Johnny Blaze and Cynthia are both in a pocket of hell where Asmodeus is, and so is Ghost Rider. But unfortunately for Asmodeus, he finds out the hard way that Ghost Rider cannot be tamed. Because at this point, I mean, he's fully awoken to who and what he is, for the most part. I mean, there's still some secrets to come later on, but I mean, this isn't the Johnny Blaze controlled Ghost Rider. Like, this is a straight up eternal demon that he's going up against. And so Asmodeus, he gets his ass kicked, and Ghost Rider is basically just this close to killing him. I mean, it's like killing a demon. Just think about it. Like, not just defeating the demon's mortal form, but like literally killing Asmodeus in his own environment. And so Asmodeus, in desperation, basically just uses his sorcery. The sorcery is able to summon on short notice to banish Johnny Blaze and Cynthia back to the mortal realm, and in turn take Ghost Rider with him, because at this point Ghost Rider is still bound to Johnny Blaze. And so that was actually a pretty intense story too. I mean, simply because you go from the intensity of Ghost Rider going up against his mortal enemy, the Orb, and then you have Ghost Rider going up against a straight up demon and his forces. And so you see just how dangerous the Ghost Rider can be. And granted, it's definitely a case of evil versus evil. While yes, Johnny Blaze is a good guy, Ghost Rider's evil. I mean, this version of Ghost Rider is definitely evil. And so you see him evil versus evil. I mean, first he takes on the very human evil of the Orb, and then you have the straight up supernatural evil of Asmodeus. So evil versus evil, demon versus demon, and Ghost Rider just defeated Asmodeus in his own realm, and would have killed him had Asmodeus not done that last minute punk out. But that was also a pretty cool issue. And also I think it was interesting in terms of the character development, or the character arc for Cynthia, because while a good portion of that issue has, she's abducted and being held in Asmodeus's part of hell, the changeling demon Razor in her form has several interesting interactions with Johnny Blaze, and like I said, it's definitely a honey trap, but at the same time there's a genuine it's like there's almost a genuine chemistry there, even though it's a trap. So it's interesting seeing Razor disguised as Cynthia, basically acting out. She was I'm guessing Razor is a she. I'm guessing Razor is a she, but she's basically posing as Cynthia, acting on Cynthia's sort of buried, like she's attracted to Johnny Blaze for sure, but not to the point of say wanting to go to town on him, so to speak. Like, she's wanting to get to know him first, but basically Razor just kind of taps into that attraction that she has for Johnny Blaze, and is able to play it up. So when she, in disguise as Cynthia, is interacting with Johnny Blaze, there's a definite sort of romantic tension there, or almost sexual tension, except it doesn't go, say, pornographic or anything like that, because this is a Marvel comic from like the old school days. But anyway, though, so I thought that was actually pretty interesting. And the very last story in this volume is another good one. It centers on the character of Red Fowler, who, as I mentioned, was introduced in issue 63, and he was initially the star stunt cyclist of the Quentin Carnival, but then he was outclassed by Johnny Blaze, and so Johnny Blaze was promoted to the lead stunt performer of the Quentin Carnival, and Red Fowler was reduced to being his, mechanic and assistant. And he was very pissed off about that. And to be fair, I mean, you can understand why he's pissed off. And so initially, I mean, he has no interest in, being friends with Johnny Blaze or Cynthia, because, I mean, initially he was kind of attracted to Cynthia, but when he sees that, she's into Johnny Blaze, who he kind of hates for taking his spotlight, he's kind of like, F y'all, but then it turns out to see that Red Fowler is in a lot of trouble with this lone guy who's a loan shark, and he's literally called the loan shark. And this is actually a pretty good story, but I do think that, the said loan shark was very cartoonish. And so, like he literally has kind of like a blade for a hand. And he has these buck teeth and a Dracula cape. And so it just, the story is actually pretty good, but let me see if I can find a good picture here. Bear with me. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, that's what the loan shark looks like. I mean, kind of looks like a buck-toothed Elvis. Not very intimidating for a guy who's supposed to be, sort of the object of Red Fowler's fear. But, you see here, he also has this, pod on his hand that the blade extends from. Ah, crap. But anyway, though, Red Fowler is actually in trouble with this loan shark guy for an ungodly amount of money. And so the loan shark and his goons have been following Red Fowler around for quite some time, and they tracked him down to Quentin Carnival, and they basically threatened to, cause all sorts of problems, for the carnival. Like they threaten to sabotage, certain acts to where people are going to get hurt, and then, they say, well, and then we're just going to kill you. And so at this point, Red Fowler, I mean, he ends up, being taken for a quote-unquote boat ride, where he's going to be sleeping with the fishes since, he keeps on, trying to dodge the loan shark. But at this point, Johnny Blaze has kind of picked up that something's going on with Red, and, he sees these, weird goons, stalking the carnival. And so, Ghost Rider naturally gets involved, and he just, wipes the floor with these guys. Like, he makes it to he gets to the boat where Red Fowler's being held captive, and prior to that, Red Fowler had actually stumbled upon the fact that Johnny Blaze was Ghost Rider. In fact, the two of them had actually raced one another, and albeit in Fowler's case, it was quite unwillingly, because he was just, on a road. He was on his bike, at night, trying to clear his mind, of all the stress and everything, trying to think, and that's when, he saw the Ghost Rider, and the two of them ended up racing, and Ghost Rider's taunting him the whole way, and Red's nearly pissing his pants in fright, and nearly wrecks his bike. And so he makes it back to the carnival, just straight up terrified, because I mean, first off, he's got this goon from his past who's finally tracked him down and is threatening to not only hurt people at the carnival but to kill him too. And then, he's, crossing paths with a demon from hell. I mean, it's like, what could happen next? And then, lo and behold, he ends up seeing, just as he makes it back to the carnival, he stumbles upon Johnny Blaze, on Ghost Rider, turning back into Johnny Blaze. And that's when he's just like, oh my God. And so he doesn't tell anyone, and he doesn't let anyone know that he knows that Johnny Blaze and Ghost Rider are one and the same. But then, he ends up being captured by Loan Shark and his goons, and he's thinking he's dead, or he's about to die, but then, Ghost Rider ends up saving his life, albeit through basically killing everyone on board the boat. And that was actually a pretty brutal moment for the series. I mean, it's not like an all-out gore fest, but, considering how, the pyrotechnic nature of what he ends up doing, I mean, it's just, it's like first, Johnny Blaze tries to, free Red himself, and he tries to outfight, the Loan Shark's goons, but unfortunately, as talented as he is in terms of athleticism, he gets his ass kicked. And so that's when, the Loan Shark, he, right when he slashes Johnny Blaze's chest, that's when Johnny Blaze turns into Ghost Rider. And so, I'll just go ahead and show you the pictures here. So, he's got Johnny Blaze at his mercy, slashes him, and then Johnny Blaze is turning into Ghost Rider, and suddenly everyone's freaking out. Yeah, they all done goofed. Now I love this line. If the searing heat of the inferno discomforts you, vermin, perhaps you would rather I chilled your souls with frigid blasts of soul-destroying fire. And, of course, they're all freaking out, and as I say, his hands, they're burned up my insides, eating away my skull like acid. Also, except he probably sounded a lot more panicked when he said it, but, mortal fool, there is no escape from the Ghost Rider. My thirst for vengeance must be satisfied. Keep away from me! My hands shall sear your immortal soul to blackened ash. And so, right when he does it, and he picks the guy up, so not only is he picking the Loan Shark up, and chunking him into the river, or right here, but he's also burning his soul, okay? And so the guy's dying by, way of having his soul burned and drowning. And I want to point out is that sometimes what will happen in the Ghost Rider book, or just in comic books in general, is that if you see someone going to their watery grave, you almost inevitably see their hand pop up in an epilogue or something showing that they're still alive. But you don't see anything like that happen with Loan Shark. Yeah, Ghost Rider straight up killed this guy, and so it's like, damn. But and then let's see, he goes to the engine room. And what do you think he does with his hellfire then? You shall all pay for having dared challenge the messenger of Satan. No one shall escape my righteous wrath. And then, of course, everyone's saying that lunatic's setting fire to the engine room, abandoned ship. And so everyone's jumping off, including Red. He's in the water bobbing up right here. But then, the ship's in flames. Yeah. Everyone's, except for Red and Johnny, are dead. So, that was actually a pretty brutal turn of events. And, of course, you got the bit where, it's basically straight up confirmed that, Johnny and Red are the only survivors. And Johnny literally carries Red back to his trailer, and tries to nurse him back to health. But, he's like, Johnny, you saved my life. I'm ashamed of the way I've been behaving. If not for you, I... Save it for later, guy. You've had a rough night. Just take it slow until you get your strength back. And so then it cuts to, to Red here thinking. He's like, Johnny, I know your horrible secret. I know the curse which torments you, but don't worry. You've got a friend. I'll stand by you no matter what the future brings. You'll never be alone again. But for Johnny Blaze, being truly alone is more than he can ever hope for. And that's like the last issue that's collected in this volume. And I think that was definitely a good way to end the collection of stories here. Although I do want to briefly touch on the stories from other series that were, kind of that made these little one-shot appearances here. The Marvel 2-in-1 story, which, this is actually the cover art from that issue, wherein Marvel 2-in-1 was a comic book series wherein the Thing teamed up with, with random characters within the Marvel universe. In this particular issue, he teams up with Ghost Rider, or he doesn't team up with him; he actually fights with him. But it was kind of it was a decent story. I mean, the artwork was good. But this was at a point in time before the Ghost Rider stories started to get good again in the latter portion of the book. This was a point where it was kind of, the stories were kind of filler, and so basically, the Thing's kind of feeling sorry for himself, because like he got angry, like he was. I think he was training in the equivalent of the Fantastic Four's Danger Room, and in the process, he accidentally almost hurt his girlfriend, Alicia Masters, who is blind, and so he's already stressed out about some stuff. But when, excuse me, he almost hurts his girlfriend, I mean, he kind of goes out and tries to blow off some steam, but he and Ghost Rider end up crossing paths with one another, and Ghost Rider and Johnny Blaze at this point in time, he's kind of feeling sorry for himself, sort of just still wandering the countryside, and ends up where the Thing is, or in the Fantastic Four are, and one thing leads to another, and Johnny Blaze turns into Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider causes some chaos and damage, and the Thing, already trying to blow off some steam, ends up getting into it with Ghost Rider, and the two of them end up fighting each other to a point where Ghost Rider nearly kills him, but then the Johnny Blaze side begins to reassert itself, because the thing is, Ghost Rider actually recognizes the Thing. Like, both Johnny Blaze and Ghost Rider recognize the Thing as someone who's not evil. And so while Ghost Rider is wanting to defeat the Thing, and is certainly willing to kill him, it's not a top desire. And so there's a part of him, I think, that was holding back. And because of that, I think, the way the story was written, the Johnny Blaze persona, begins to reassert itself. And so, once he sees, just how much damage, he's caused, and he and the Thing kind of, come to an understanding with one another. And it's like the Thing, he's like, usually I think, my life's bad, but then I realize that some people have it worse. And I mean, the story itself, I mean, it's an okay story, but I will admit that I liked that little bit of, you got that idea that, the Ghost Rider, I mean, even though he's a demon from hell, he recognizes that the Thing's actually a good person. Like, he's not someone that he would ordinarily go after, and also the fact that, because he's not wanting to actually kill him, even though he eventually does end up trying to do so, like, he didn't set out to try and kill the Thing. Like, he was just, doing what he does as a demon. And the Thing, though, and it's like, I liked how it's like they were both trying to initially blow off steam in their own way, and that's how they ended up, getting into a fight. But of course, the Thing, though, it's like when he realizes, that Johnny Blaze and the Ghost Rider are one and the same, and just how, twisted, Johnny Blaze's, curse is, that's when it's like, he realizes, hey, maybe my problems aren't so bad after all. And of course, Johnny Blaze is, left to, continue his wandering and what have you. So, I mean, not a great story. I mean, not a bad story, but not a great story either. But I did like that little bit where, showing, sort of the thought process on Ghost Rider in the sense of, him recognizing someone who is actually good, and, even he has some form of moral standard, even though he's a demon from hell, and he has no problem causing damage otherwise. But, so that wasn't a bad story, but I mean, it wasn't a great story, but it's one of those things that, if it wasn't included in the volume, I mean, it wouldn't be much of a loss. But at the same time, its inclusion, while it does kind of fall into place with the majority of the other stories that were filler at this point in the book, that little bit there, with the psychology of Ghost Rider, and of course the bit where Johnny Blaze and the Thing come to an understanding, that was actually pretty cool. It just I wish the actual story had been better. But the other bit, let's see, there was an excerpt from a comic book called Marvel Superheroes, issue number 11. And Marvel Superheroes was actually a 90s comic book title, and so this was, while the story was written in the 90s, while it was written and illustrated in the 90s, it was set, during, say, like the late 70s, early 80s. It was supposed to be around this time in Johnny Blaze's story as Ghost Rider, and it's a story that takes place in the past. And I don't know, I just didn't really like it. Like, the artwork wasn't bad. Like, it was definitely, you could definitely tell it was 90s artwork, because it sort of had this sort of Jim Lee light feel to it. But at the same time, the story, though, it felt very confusing, because mainly because at this point, in this story, Johnny Blaze and Red Fowler are depicted as being good friends. And the adventure that they go on together, like, at this point, Red Fowler he's shown as knowing that Johnny Blaze is Ghost Rider and being okay with it, and Johnny Blaze knows that Red Fowler knows, and the two of them end up coming across a situation where there's like some sort of weird pseudo-religious cult, and there's a woman who she is either she's either a mutant, or she might actually be somewhat supernaturally gifted, one of the two, but she's like a pyrokinetic or something like that. And I think it's like, they try to have this bit where she was trying to break away from this religious cult that one of her family members was in charge of, but then there's like a conflict there, and because of Ghost Rider's involvement, I mean, you have, like, on one hand, you have a straight up demon from hell getting involved, but then you have this minister of this religious cult who's preaching fire and brimstone, and then you have the woman who is trying to who was trying to break away from the cult, and also trying to talk some sense into the minister who was someone that she was family with, but then on the other hand, she's like someone who they see as a demon because of her pyrokinetic powers, but there's like a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that she might just be a mutant or something like that. Like, it wasn't really a memorable story. I mean, like, the writing wasn't terrible, but it just felt like they took some like, the writing felt sort of cliched, especially when it came to, say, the minister and the rogue minister and his dialogue. Like, he came across like a televangelist on steroids, and the woman, her motivation, it could have been interesting, but just the way it was written, it just, like, it really felt like something in the mold from the filler Ghost Rider stories at the time. Like, her inclusion, it just felt very random. Like, you didn't really, at least I didn't really feel any investment with her character. But then, but the worst part, though, I think, was the fact that the story was depicting Red Fowler and Johnny Blaze as being friends, and like I said, Red Fowler knowing that Johnny Blaze is Ghost Rider, and Blaze knowing that Red Fowler knows that he's Ghost Rider. But the problem is, at the point that this story is introduced and is included in this volume, it's before the issue of the original Ghost Rider series, issue 64. It's before the issue where Red Fowler, discovers the secret of Johnny Blaze and Ghost Rider, and it's certainly way before the two of them became friends. And so I think if they were to include that story at any point within the essential Ghost Rider series, they probably should have had that story in volume 4, which was the last volume in this Ghost Rider series. Because at that point, Johnny Blaze had become more part of the Quentin Carnival family, and he and Red Fowler, at that point in the series, the two of them were definitely friends. And so if they had put that story from the Marvel Superheroes issue within that volume that came after this one, volume 4, it would have made a lot more sense. I'm not saying it would have been a good story, because the story as written was just kind of random, sort of filler monster of the week. So I mean, it fit within the filler stories that were taking up the majority of this book, but at the same time, it didn't fit within the narrative of, say, Johnny Blaze's and Red Fowler's, friendship, or their relationship, as friends, and so just not a good story, not a terrible story. I mean, it's frankly a very forgettable story, but I mean, if they had to include it, they really should have put it in volume 4, not this one, because it's like you go from a couple of issues of Ghost Rider where Red Fowler's hating Johnny Blaze's guts to suddenly, hey, we're best friends, and then you read issue 64 and it's back to Red Fowler hating Johnny Blaze and then finding out who Johnny Blaze is and then saying, okay, you've got a friend, So I mean, it's confusing in that sense. So you've got two stories from other comic books within this issue that are just kind of, I mean, not terrible, but just sort of there, But on the other hand, third time's charm. The issue Avengers 214, that was actually a really, really good story. You have the creative team on that issue. It was let's see, Jim Shooter doing the writing, and Jim Shooter had some experience working on Ghost Rider back in Essential Ghost Rider Volume 2. So it's interesting because, I mean, while he was writing Avengers at this point in time, the fact that he was able to bring Johnny Blaze and Ghost Rider in as a kind of a guest shot story and still make it a memorable one shouldn't be surprising, because when Jim Shooter had a brief tenure of duty writing Ghost Rider, that was when the series actually started to have a form of stability. And I'm not going to say like the best stories came out of his short tenure, but they started to become good. Like the themes of Ghost Rider and Johnny Blaze being separate individuals. That's when that first happened when Jim Shooter was working on the series. And so seeing him bringing Johnny Blaze into an Avengers story, you'd had Ghost Rider, Johnny Blaze teaming up or fighting other Marvel superheroes before. I mean, of course, he was in the short-lived superhero team, the Champions, which was frequently alluded to back in Volume 1, but because the issues that Johnny Blaze was in weren't collected in that volume, it just kind of felt confusing. But the fact is, he had interactions with the superhero community, and most importantly, for the story of Avengers 214, his former teammate from the Champions, Warren Worthington, aka Angel, was one of the members of the Champions, as was Johnny Blaze. And at that point in time, Johnny Blaze was at the point where, he was under the impression that he just turned into Ghost Rider and had the powers of a demon, but he still had his own, mind and soul, so to speak. And so did the Champions, his fellow teammates. They thought that was the case too. This is before anyone knew that the two were separate beings. But in this Avengers story, it's coming on the tail end of when the Avengers team member Hank Pym and his Yellow Jacket guys had kind of gone insane, and amongst other things had hit his wife, Janet, aka the Wasp. And basically that led to a whole bunch of other stuff happening, and he ended up getting fired from the team and put on administrative leave, essentially. Or no, he was fired. Sorry, he was fired from the team. So the Avengers that are depicted in this issue are kind of reeling from that, and they're trying to discuss, okay, how do we go forward from that? And you have certain characters checking in on Janet, making sure she's okay. And it was kind of a rather jolting, seeing Janet with her eye blackened, and she's still recovering from that. I mean, she's still trying to carry on with life, but at the same time, you could tell that that bit with her husband really shook her up. So on one hand, Jim Shooter did a really good job of, even though this was an issue from another comic book series, being brought into this volume of Ghost Rider. Jim Shooter was a good enough, writer to where he was able to catch, readers up on what's going on with the Avengers. So even if you hadn't read any prior Avengers issues, to this one, which is probably going to be a case with a lot of people who read this volume of Ghost Rider, he was really good at catching people up on what was going on with them. So that way, when they have their showdown with Ghost Rider, there's definitely an emotional investment as to the outcome of the confrontation. And so, the Avengers that are given the focus here are, Captain America, Tigra, or is it Tigra? Yeah, we'll go with Tigra. Captain America, Tigra, Thor, and Iron Man. And so at this point, most of the Avengers are kind of, off doing other things. And so, this makeshift team of 4 ends up, being the only ones available to try and, capture Ghost Rider. Because what ends up happening is Johnny Blaze is brought into the story because, this is at the point where, he's still wandering the country. This is before he's found the Quentin Carnival. But he's basically, feeling sorry for himself. And he sees, in the distance, he sees this, couple in a sports car driving along the country roads, enjoying life and everything. And Johnny Blaze is just remembering all the stuff they used to have, the fame, the women, all that stuff. And he's just pissed off at the fact that, now he's, he never knows where his next meal's coming from. And here he is, he's seeing this, happy couple just, blithely enjoying life. And so he gets really pissed off because of where he is in his life. And so he just decides to let some anger out by turning into Ghost Rider. Like, he's not wanting to kill anyone or anything like that, but at the same time, he's wanting to kind of give this couple a scare, just to kind of, make himself feel better and blow off some steam. So, initially, it seemed like it was just going to be a little prank, like a rather scary prank, but prank, and definitely not one of Johnny Blaze's best moments, because he reacted in anger, and he deliberately, let Ghost Rider take over in anger, just to humiliate this couple and make himself feel better. But as it turns out, this couple consists of Warren Worthington, the Angel, Johnny Blaze's and Ghost Rider's former teammate from the Champions, and Warren's then girlfriend Candy. And so Ghost Rider, he appears alongside him and basically causes them to crash their car. And of course Warren and Candy are both freaking out, and Warren's even more freaked out because on one hand he initially recognized Ghost Rider and he was thinking that, hey, this is my old buddy from the Champions, and then next thing you know, said old buddy had just tried to essentially have them killed or at least it seemed like they tried to have him killed. And so Warren, he's really freaked out and pissed off at Ghost Rider, and he's calling him out and saying, are you crazy? You could have gotten us killed. And so he's like, what do you want with us? And Ghost Rider just says, it's like, I recognize you. And he says, I want to race. And so your wings against my bike. And so and Warren's like, are you crazy? I'm not going to race you. And Ghost Rider, he just straight up tells him, he's like, if you don't race me, I might have some fun with your woman. Or the way he says it is, we'll see how your woman likes my fiery kiss. Still pretty creepy either way. So anyway, Warren, he agrees to it. And initially, it's kind of a combination of, on one hand, he genuinely wants to race Ghost Rider to see if he can beat him, with his wings. But on the other hand, he's trying to get Ghost Rider away from Candy so she can call for help or something. And so, the two of them race, but as soon as he's sure that Candy is, safely out of the way, he tries to kind of take the fight to Ghost Rider. I mean, he knows he can't actually defeat him, but he's trying to, basically take him to task and call him out on, his behavior. because I mean this was so atypical to the Johnny Blaze slash Ghost Rider he knew back when they were in the Champions together. I mean he was a good guy back then. He's like, what the hell happened? What's happened to you? And Ghost Rider in turn basically takes him by the wings and fries him with his hellfire, to a point where Warren is basically comatose for a bit and has to be taken to a hospital. And Candy, you see her at his bedside, and she's calling the Avengers mansion because she's trying to get in touch with the Beast, as in Hank McCoy from the X-Men, who at this point in time actually was a member of the Avengers. But because Beast was unavailable, she ended up getting Captain America, who was on monitor duty at the time. And so she, tells him what just happened. And so, Captain America decides to, go ahead and put together kind of a makeshift improvised team to take on the Ghost Rider, because, I mean, they've certainly heard of the Ghost Rider, and they know of the Ghost Rider, from, his tenure of duty as, a member of the Champions, as well as, some of the stories they've heard, over the years of Ghost Rider, fighting crime and occasionally causing damage and what have you. But they're thinking that, Captain America and his, makeshift team, they're pretty sure they can take him down because they're thinking he's just a superpowered biker, right? Wrong. They don't, factor in the notion that Ghost Rider just might be a real demon from hell, and they find out the hard way. Because at this point, Johnny Blaze, Ghost Rider's turned back to Johnny Blaze, and he's in this, a different town. He's basically, he kind of remembers what he did as Ghost Rider, and on one hand, he feels terrible about it, and because that was his, a former friend and comrade of his that he just, used the hellfire on as Ghost Rider, and he feels terrible about it. And so, he's in town, he's trying to find an odd job here and there, and just kind of, give himself time to think. But then he ends up basically, turning into Ghost Rider again when this kid ends up, getting into an accident and nearly getting killed. And Johnny Blaze is the only one who's in the area, who's nearby enough to where he could possibly save him. But unfortunately, the only way he could save him is by turning into Ghost Rider. And so he turns into Ghost Rider and saves the kid, but then, he starts causing damage in the town just for grins as Ghost Rider. And so that's when the Avengers, this makeshift team, tracks him down. So you have Captain America, Thor, Tigra, and Iron Man, all trying to take a shot at him, and he just wipes the floor with these guys. And basically, Iron Man, despite all his technology, ends up literally getting fried with hellfire, and Thor ends up humbled in a rather memorable way. Basically, he tries to use Mjolnir, the hammer, against Ghost Rider, but what ends up happening is just that Ghost Rider kind of turns it against him, and the line of dialogue that he has is actually rather intriguing, because you have a demon from hell kind of arguing with a god of thunder. And so at this point, he's already taken out Captain America and Tigra with his hellfire, and they don't have any sort of protection from that whatsoever. Captain America's mighty shield doesn't do squat against it. And Tigra, she's a little out of her depth here. Give her credit. She's a committed member of the Avengers, and she's good at what she does, but going up against a demon from hell, this is a first for her, and she gets her ass kicked, as does Captain America. So it's like they both underestimate the situation. But yeah, so Iron Man homes in on Ghost Rider, and at this point, you see Ghost Rider, showing off by riding on his showboating on his own stunt cycle. But so another stupid human, and Iron Man says, another one who's going to make you regret harming the first two. I'm not impressed by your trick riding and flaming gimmicks, mister. You're playing in the big leagues now. My armor can withstand any fire you can generate. And so Iron Man actually does manage to tackle Ghost Rider off his Hell Cycle. And so, I mean, yeah, he knocks Ghost Rider off his cycle. He does that much at least. And Ghost Rider's all like, perhaps, but your armor has openings, Metal Man. And then he just fries him in the face with his Hellfire. And Iron Man, Tony Stark, in his arrogance, in his own words, forgot to seal his eye slits and mouth. And he just forgot. And he got fried, and he's smoking. And so Iron Man's down for the count. And so that just leaves Thor. And so Thor comes in and he says, if he is injured, demon, bah, you all say the same things, and you all fall before the searing sting of hellfire. Fire from thine eyes! And yes, if you look carefully, you can actually see Ghost Rider blasting Thor from his eyes with hellfire. Truly your power is fearsome, demon. It's no wonder mortals wither before it. But what matters this bitter cold flame of yours to one who has trod the icy wastes of Niflheim and endured the horror of the nether realms? It serves you well to claim kinship with the devil men name in their religions. Liar! You are but a creature of dark magic, a demon from some hellish mystic realm. I too am a being from a mystic realm. I know what you are, and I fear thee not. The hammer of Thunder God shall smite thee down, false one. If it can catch me, stupid. Ha! You denounce my lies, cretin, but you are fond of calling yourself a god, are you not? And did you not in ancient times allow men to worship you? Oh, but nowadays things are different, eh? You use the word god in the legendary sense. I see. Still, each of us in our own way exploit the weakness and ignorance of these humans. Yes, we are much alike, you and I, except that you are overrated, Thunder God. Ah, the force of the throw is spent, and it turns as I knew it would. It is enchanted. And I should say at this point, okay, so you have this really badass visual of Thor coming out of the hellfire, intact. Then he chunks the hammer at Ghost Rider. And Ghost Rider's literally racing Mjolnir at this point while he's having his little, dialogue with him. And then, right here, yes, Ghost Rider catches Mjolnir and rides it right back to Thor. He doesn't try and control it, he just lets it, take its natural course. Ah, the force of the throw is spent, and it turns as I knew it would. It is enchanted, and a creature such as I perceives such things as easily as mortals perceive the mundane. Fly, hammer, take me to your master. And sure enough, he literally, rides it right back to Thor. But, of course, this being Thor's hammer, the actual hammer itself couldn't strike Thor, but the impact of, Ghost Rider riding along at Thor basically knocked them both off guard. The hammer would not strike him. It tore itself from my hand and returned to his. I see. It always returns to his hand when thrown, no matter what. Still, it lent enough force to my attack to humble him. And then, I love this little shot right here. You see, the Captain America, Tigra, and Iron Man coming back, and they're clearly still weakened from Thor, from the hellfire that Ghost Rider had blasted them with. And then Thor's right here, just sitting on his butt. I just got knocked on my ass here. It's like, Thor, are you all right? Aye, and wiser. Yeah. So basically, Ghost Rider just wipes the floor with these guys, and they're able to sort of, put their heads together and be like, okay, now that we have some idea of what we're dealing with, this actually is a demon from hell. we have to change our strategy. And so to give them credit, they all actually put forth a stronger effort the second time around, to the point where they're actually able to get some hits in on Ghost Rider. But unfortunately, Ghost Rider is still able to outpower them, and he comes very close to killing all four of them until Warren Worthington comes back out of the hospital and, basically is able to appeal to, the inner good nature of Johnny Blaze. And, Johnny Blaze basically reasserts himself in Ghost Rider. And this was actually a pretty neat moment here, because Warren, he's still recovering from being hit by Hellfire, and he's clearly still traumatized, but at the same time, he had the guts to come into this battle zone. And so yeah, is that what you want, Blaze? To be destroyed? What? You? Yeah, me. I came out of it a few hours ago. The doc said I should stay put. But, well, you know how I am. And incidentally, yeah, he's got a broken arm. So, yeah. All right. I heard you had shown yourself, and I figured you need a friend. I have no friends. You used to, both as Johnny Blaze and as Ghost Rider. But you fixed that real good. I have a theory about you. I think that the more bitter and unhappy you are as Johnny Blaze, the more ruthless and savage the Ghost Rider is when he emerges. You haven't been too happy as Johnny Blaze lately, I take it. I heard you lost your title, so you took it out on me. That was dumb enough, but then you made it worse. You almost made it a lot worse. What if the Avengers hadn't stopped you? Were you out to kill me? Burn the town? Where would it have ended? I must seek vengeance. I must. Yeah, I know, the spirit of vengeance. As a spirit of vengeance, you have no choice. So, I'm the one you picked to hate, demon. Here I am. Do it. Kill me. And then, and I just love this, because Warren, yeah, he has the wings and everything, but, he may as well just be an ordinary schmuck at this point, facing off with a demon from hell. With a busted arm, as well. But this got to him. This got to Ghost Rider, to where, he's remembering, the fact that, yes, the two of them actually did serve together on a team. And then, of course, Johnny Blaze, he comes out and, yeah, as Johnny Blaze, I have no choice. And so, yeah. It's, yeah. Ode's blood. What do we do now? Nothing. The Ghost Rider's gone, and Johnny Blaze has committed no crime. Come on, Johnny. Let me help you. Leave me alone. Please just leave me alone. And then Captain America chimes in. This reminds me of Hank in a way. He lets things get to him. Made one mistake, and then made it worse. And right there, he's talking about how Hank McCoy, the Beast from the X-Men, when he was with when he got to join the Avengers, he had tried to turn himself back into an ordinary human again, but instead, it was I forgot if it was it was a potion of some sort, or anyway, whatever means he used, it basically mutated him into the hairy beast we all know and love now. Whereas before he was just a big guy with big feet and hands, but now it's like he's full on beast. And so yeah, that's what that was a reference to. And Tigra says, what will become of him? And Captain America is kind of turning back, looking at Johnny and saying, he has help available if he wants it, but it's like he said, he has a choice. No big brother can make it for him. In the end, it's all up to him. And so I like this shot. It's like they're all just, walking away, and Johnny Blaze is just, left there. And yeah, Warren's just, standing there, with his friend. But, in the end, that's all Johnny can do is make the decision to, try and, get help for a situation. But I'm going to go ahead and give Essential Ghost Rider Volume 3 3 stars out of 5. It really was, kind of been there, done that filler for probably like the first, 2/3 of the book, with the occasional good story thrown in. But then, once the latter portion of the book came in, I think that they really started to pull their strength together. The writing and art teams just kind of got together and got the story back on track. And so if it hadn't been for the final portion of this book, I think I probably would have given this one 2 out of 5 stars instead of 3. But because of how well done the last third of the book is, and showing just how good the series could be, as well as that Avengers story, which is easily one of the best stories to include Ghost Rider as a guest character. I think that that definitely saved the book from being just it was actually a decent book. I just wish that the rest of the stories had been on par with the last portion of stories, because the last portion of stories, those were good, and that was it definitely saved the book. It made it to where the whole thing was worthwhile. It's just that you have to slog through a bunch of filler to get to that point. But yeah, so 3 out of 5 stars. It was a decent book. So look at the time. Thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. If you like what you see here, you got any suggestions or anything like that, or comments, please feel free to drop a line, let me know. And if you actually like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. But y'all have a good night. Take care. Bye.